Week number 14 of the 2025 fantasy football season kicks off tonight on Thursday Night Football. And before the games start for week 14, we are going to set your lineups at the tight end position in today's video. We're going to be breaking down every single matchup from Thursday Night Football all the way up until Monday Night Football. I'll tell you guys whether you should start or sit the tight ends in all those games, as well as where I believe they'll finish by the end of the week. It is important to note that there are 4 teams on bye this week, the final week with byes this season: the Patriots, the Giants, the 49ers, and the Panthers. So get those players out of your lineup. If you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below like it owes you some money. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 14 tight end start or sit decisions for the 2025 fantasy football season. We begin with Thursday Night Football, the Dallas Cowboys at the Detroit Lions. Now, despite the fact that the Cowboys and the Chiefs had a shootout on Thanksgiving, Jake Ferguson didn't make a gigantic splash. He had just 5 receptions on 6 targets for 36 yards as the tight end number 18. Prior to last week, though, back-to-back top 9 showings coming out the bye week facing a Lions defense this week that allows the 22nd most points to tight ends on a per-game basis. I'm definitely predicting him to bounce back here in the highest Vegas total on the week, set at 54.5. I got him as a high-end tight end 1. Now, with Brock Wright out with a neck injury, Ross Dwelley will slot in as the tight end 1 for the Lions. We all know that tight ends love the end zone in prime time, but when it comes to Ross Dwelley, who had just 1 reception on 3 targets last week for 3 yards up against the Packers on 75% of the snaps, I have no interest in rolling the dice here with him. Now we move to the 1 p.m. slated games on Sunday, the Seattle Seahawks at the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Kyle Pitts went ballistic last week after a 4-game skid with under 10 points in each game from weeks 9 through 12. In last week's action in MetLife up against the Jumbo Jets, he had 7 receptions on 8 targets for 82 yards, the tight end 5. In the 3 games played with Kirk Cousins as the starting quarterback, he has had 9 targets against the Dolphins in week 8, 5 targets up against the Saints in week 12, and last week he had 8 targets. So in the 5th best matchup for tight ends on a per game basis, I got Pitts ranked as a mid-range tight end 1 this week. Now, AJ Barner was limited in practice on Wednesday with a knee and shoulder injury. Being limited is a good indication that he could play on Sunday, but it is definitely something that you want to follow if you plan on playing him. Now, Barner is very boom or bust as his targets bounce around weekly, and that has heavily impacted his finishes. He has scored less than 8 points now in back-to-back games, so in the second worst matchup for tight ends on a per-game basis, with there being so much inconsistency with the game of AJ Barner, I would just prefer to sit him. Now we move to the Cincinnati Bengals at no one circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills. Now, if Dalton Kincaid is able to play on Sunday, he will be in your lineup. He missed last 3 games with a hamstring injury, so his status certainly needs to be monitored as he was limited in practice on Wednesday. Kincaid has been a great start this season when healthy. The Bengals are the best matchup for tight ends on a per-game basis, so as long as Kincaid is able to play, I got him as a mid-range tight end 1. If he is out, then I'm not going to play Dawson Knox one time if you are with me, even in a wet dream matchup like this, because there is no guarantee that he even sees remotely enough usage to be valuable in a great matchup here. Now, when it comes to the Cincinnati Bengals, Mike Likiamagasiki and Noah Fant are in a tight end split. Neither guy is even guaranteed to see more than 2 targets at this point. At the end of the day, either of these guys could score, and it wouldn't surprise me, but it's too much of a guessing game, so I'd prefer to sit both of them. Now we move to the Tennessee Titans at the Cleveland Browns. Now, Harold Fannin has been looking mighty fine with Shedeur Sanders under center. In both games, he has had 5+ targets. Last week up against the 49ers, he had 3 receptions on 5 targets for 43 yards and a touchdown, as well as 1 carry. The biggest problem with Fannin is that the team doesn't really seem to be confident in throwing the ball a ton with Shedeur under center, even if the team is getting smacked up like they did last week by the 49ers. So in the 24th best matchup for tight ends, he is a low-end tight end 1, and David Njoku kind of just seems out of the picture at this point. He is not a guy that you would want to be starting. Now, when it comes to Gunnar Helm, he has emerged as a big piece, of this Titans offense. 7 targets in back-to-back games. The problem is with me having such little trust in this offense. I don't have the confidence level to actually start him, even though last week he had 6 receptions on 7 targets for 23 yards, with the game seemingly being super low scoring on paper. In the 16th best matchup for tight ends on a per game basis, I got Gunnar as a clear sit. Now we move to the Washington Commanders at the cold-like Minnesota Vikings. Now, with Max Brosmer, while the Vikings offense blew more than a hairdryer, Hawkinson, on the other hand, actually had his best game in months. 6 receptions on 6 targets for 59 yards as the tight end 11 in Seattle. The odds of that happening again with shaky ball J.J. McCarthy is virtually impossible. No way you are playing Hawkinson at this point in the season. For Zach Ertz, he had his best game of the season last week. Marcus Mariota was feeding this dude the ball like his name was Fat Albert. 10 receptions on 13 targets for 106 yards as the tight end number 3. He has gotten 8+ targets now in back-to-back games. So while Zach Ertz is far from the sexiest start on earth, based on his involvement as of recently, he is a low-end tight end 1 in the 15th best matchup for tight ends on a per-game basis. Now we move to the Miami Dolphins at the New York Jumbo Jets. Now Darren Waller returned last week up against the Saints to 47% of the snaps with 2 receptions on 3 targets for 47 yards. He was missed on a wide-open touchdown as Tua wasn't locked in last week, which obviously ruined what could have been a great day for Waller, because if Tua just threw the ball a couple inches lower, then Darren Waller comes in with another toe tap touchdown like his name was Antonio Brown, and Darren Waller has a great day, but instead it was just kind of meh. I expect Darren Waller to get further ramped up this week. While last week may not have shown that Tua and Waller have this 5G LTE great connection, I do believe from what we've seen earlier on the season, they do. So the Jets are the 17th best matchup for tight ends on a per-game basis. I got Waller as a high-end tight end too. Now with Tyrod Taylor under center, the Jets offense has looked far better. Mason Taylor hasn't felt that elevation yet, though. Back-to-back games with fewer than 6 fantasy points. But if there ever was going to be a game that kind of jolts him, Jolteon style, into having that upside game, it would be this week up against the Dolphins, right? We've seen Mason Taylor have good games. There just hasn't been any consistency. And Jason Taylor's son, Dolphins legend, the Dolphins allow the 3rd most points to tight ends on a per-game basis. So while Taylor is very, very, very risky, he is in the tight end 16 to 18 range, last-ditch effort type of start here. Now we got the New Orleans Saints at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now with Chris Godwin back in the fold and Mike Evans returning soon or even potentially this week, there is no reason to risk Otton at all anymore. He had a great run. It was solid for you at points in the season, but with Godwin continuing to get ramped up, more of the targets will fall away from the hands of Otton. Last week, just 2 targets on 2 receptions up against the Cardinals for 9 yards. So while this is an average matchup for tight ends, as the Saints allow the 18th most points to tight ends on a per-game basis, I just have no interest in starting Otton anymore based on the scenario that he's in. Now, with Tyler Shuck showing some life in New Orleans, I am even more excited about Juwan Johnson. He has had 7+ targets in back-to-back games coming out of the bye week, 5 receptions on 9 targets for 39 yards as the tight end 16 last week in Miami up against my Fins. And the 20th best matchup for tight ends on a per-game basis this week, I just feel like we are on the precipice of that big game coming, right? We've seen him from Juwan this season. I think it happens this week. I got him as a low-end tight end number 1. Now we move to the Indianapolis Colts at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Tyler Warren has been one of the most reliable tight ends in fantasy football this season, so we are just going to continue to blindly firing him up every single week. He is just going to blindly be in your lineup. A bit of a slip-up over the last 2 weeks as he finished outside the top 12 in both games, but he was the tight end 13 and 14, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. 3 receptions on 4 targets last week for 22 yards and a touchdown up against a strong Houston Texans defense. This week in the 2nd best matchup for tight ends on a per-game basis, I expect him to go Super Saiyan mode all over the Jacksonville Jaguars in Duval. I got him as a tight end top 3 option. He is my tight end 3 this week. I was going to try to make it a little bit more magical. Ooh, is he 1? Is he 2? Is he 3? He's the tight end 3 this week for the "This is our Colts. This is our team. We bleed blue. This is our Colts. Whether win or lose, we love them." Shout out to Seth. So for the Jaguars in Duval, Brenton Strange, ever since he returned from injury, he has played 2 games. Since he has returned, he has been a top 7 tight end in both games. Last week in Tennessee, he was the only 10 I see because he was the tight end 7 with 3 receptions on 4 targets for 45 yards and a touchdown. So in the 4th best matchup for tight ends on a per game basis up against the Colts, I am feeling real nicey about Strange this week. I got him as a must-start top 6 tight end. Now we move to the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Baltimore Ravens. Now Mark Andrews just signed a 3-year extension with the Ravens for $39 million, which tells you that Isaiah Likely will just never become the guy in Baltimore, despite Andrews being far from elite this season. Last week up against the Bengals, he had 4 receptions on 6 targets for 47 yards, the tight end 17. This week, he faced the 6th best matchup for tight ends on a per-game basis, so this could be the big game that goes his way. Hopefully, Lamar figures things out because Lamar has been really fucking things up here in Baltimore, so I got Andrews as a low-end tight end 1, but it's important to note that Lamar might not actually play on Sunday. So if Mark Andrews is playing, obviously, and Lamar isn't, I would be very nervous to play Mark Andrews and definitely wouldn't have him ranked as a top 12 option. Darnell Washington for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I say this every single week about the Steelers tight ends, so I'm going to keep it brief. Ultimately, when you utilize 3 tight ends, Darnell Washington, Pat Freiermuth, Jonnu Smith, weekly, it is impossible to actually start a single one of them. While each guy has shown some sparks this season, even if you end up being able to correctly guess which tight end will score the most amount of points in this matchup up against the Ravens, it is far from a guarantee that your assumption of who is the best tight end this week actually scores enough points for them to even be worthy of being in your lineup. So in the 9th worst matchup for tight ends on a per game basis up against Baltimore, I think all the Steelers tight ends should be on your bench. Now we move to the 4 p.m. slated games with the Denver Broncos at the Las Vegas Raiders. But before we break down this game in depth at the tight end position, as well as the rest of the games on the Week 14 slate, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends, our partner over at Underdog. If you're brand new to Underdog, sign up using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. You receive a free pick plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus funds. As well as if you play $5 in the pick'em, you receive an additional $100 in bonus funds or in bonus entries. How does the pick'em work? It's incredibly simple. You make at least 2 picks on the players higher or lower. If those picks hit, you get paid. If you do multiple other picks, then all of the picks need to hit, but the payout will be higher. Make sure you guys do check that out. Promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. Now, Evan Ingram had his best game of the season last week in that overtime thriller win up against the Commanders in Landover, Maryland. He had 6 receptions on 9 targets for 79 yards with 5+ targets in 3 straight games. Last time out up against the Raiders, he was the tight end 36. So acting like Evan Ingram is anything but a desperation start would be straight up crazy. In the 4th worst matchup for tight ends, he's in the tight end 16 to 18 range that frankly no one actually wants to start, but some of you may have to. For the Raiders, despite the fact that Geno Smith blows more than Bonnie Blue, the other BB, Brock Bowers, has been phenomenal. Since returning from injury, he's been a top 7 tight end in 4 of 5 games. His only down game, coincidentally, was up against the Broncos, where he had 1 reception on 3 targets for 31 yards back in week number 10. I would expect, though, more than 1 touchdown to be scored, this time around compared to last time where there was just 1 touchdown. So Bowers should be much better off. Last week, he was 4 for 4 like he was at Wendy's for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns, with one of those touchdowns being one of which I felt like was the best of the season. In the 14th best matchup for tight ends, I expect Brock Bowers to stay in the flame as a must-start top 3 tight end. Now we got the Chicago Bears at the Green Bay Packers, and any hope that Luke Musgrave would pick up the slack after Tucker Kraft is out for the season is just over. The man hasn't scored more than 4 fantasy points in 3 straight games and hasn't even seen over 2 targets since week 10. And in that game, he had just 3. There's no need to even roster him at this point. Colston Loveland is a high upside option weekly, though his floor is too low to rank him inside the top 12. The reason why his floor is so low is because the team just wants to shove Cole Kmet down our throats. If the Bears just tossed him to the side and let Loveland be the head chef of this tight end room, that'd be banging the drum for Loveland weekly. But sadly, this season, that does not really seem to be the case with Kmet healthy. Loveland was the tight end 28 last week with 3 receptions on 6 targets for 28 yards in Philadelphia on Black Friday. This week, he faces the 21st best matchup for tight ends on a per game basis. With his upside alone being high, he is a high-end tight end too, but he's really never going to be a guy that you can feel great about due to the constant deployment of Cole Kmet. Now we got the LA Rams at the Arizona Cardinals. Now from week 6 on, when Jacoby Brissett took over, Trey McBride has shape-shifted into the best tight end in fantasy football. He has been a top 6 tight end in all games with Brissett and has been a top 2 tight end in all games but one. Last week in Tampa up against the Bucs, he shoved a boot up their candy ass like his name was The Rock. 8 receptions on 9 targets for 82 yards and a touchdown. This week, in the 19th best matchup for tight ends on a per-game basis up against the Rams, Trey McBride is a must-start. Top 3 tight end. He is my tight end 1, just like he's going to be most people's tight end 1, right? We don't have to sit here and hit the guy with the gawk 9,000 special, metaphorically, of course, for you to know to start him. Now, I will keep it short like Kyler Murray when it comes to talking about the Rams tight end room. When you utilize 3 different tight ends, like we talked about with the Steelers, it is virtually impossible to start any of them. Now, Parkinson has scored in 3 of his last 4 games, but ultimately his targets aren't steady enough to actually trust him, especially when they have Kyren and Adams, who are just lethal red zone weapons. Leave him on your bench. Now we move to, cause you waited all day for Sunday night, the Houston Texans at the Kansas City Chiefs. Now with CJ Stroud back in the saddle, like his name was Jesse from Toy Story, Dalton Schultz has been back in the good graces of fantasy players. 7 receptions on 8 targets for 55 yards in Indy, while he only has 1 touchdown this season, and that certainly does hurt his upside. Over the last 5 weeks, he has had 8+ targets in 4 of 5 games. So while the Chiefs matchup is far from ideal, as they allowed the 6th least amount of points to tight ends on a per-game basis, the guy has played well enough to be ranked as a high-end tight end too. Now, Mr. Swift, Travis Kelce, has been great this season. He hasn't necessarily been the old version of himself, but based on how rocky the tight end position has been this season, you are very happy that you ended up drafting Travis Kelce. Since the bye week, he has had 2 of 3 games inside the top 4, with his 1 down game in that stretch being the tight end 16. Last week in Jerry's world in Dallas, he had 5 receptions on 6 targets for 45 yards and a touchdown. The Texans are the 5th worst matchup for tight ends, but based on how Kelce has performed this season, I am going to continue to tout him highly. I got him as a must-start top 5 option this week at the tight end position. Final game here, Monday Night Football, the Philadelphia Eagles at the LA Superchargers. Now, Dallas Goedert has been atrocious over the last 3 games of the season so far, with Jalen Hurts playing like a blind guy and the Eagles offense being limp dick. That certainly does not help either. 3 straight games under 5 fantasy points, and I'm basically done with him. We know deep down the upside is there, as he was dominant earlier on in the season from weeks 1 through 8, but since the bye week, he has regressed heavily. This is the 26th best matchup for tight ends on a per game basis, so he's a break glass in case of emergency desperation start at this point that is elevated by the fact that there are 4 teams on bye. Again, we know the upside is there, but frankly, how many times can a guy bend you over the table before you just give up on him, right? He's in the tight end 16 to 18 range. Now, speaking of losing your patience, that's kind of how I feel about Aaron Gadsden. And I am even more nervous now that Herbert just had to have surgery on his non-throwing hand. Last week, he had just 2 targets. The game prior, he was getting 5+ targets, though, basically every week. So I do expect the targets to come back his way. But this matchup being brutal, as the Eagles allow the 3rd least amount of points to a tight end on a per-game basis. And matched with Herbert being banged up, he is a high-end tight end too, just based on upside alone. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you didn't enjoying, make sure you guys do hit that subscribe button down below, like it owes you some money. Leave a like on today's video to help me out a ton. Check out one of the videos on the screen if you haven't seen them already. Love you long time. As always, have a great one. Good boy!